There was literally a baying mob outside. They were shouting, "Off with their heads."
Look at the smashed window and the paint all over it.
Camilla and Charles looking quite shocked as something was poked in through the window.
And Camilla was horrified that they could get so close.
There's such a synergy between great austerity in Britain and the public rising up against the royal family.
Welcome to Royal Exclusive Rewind, your look back at the most memorable moments, the triumphs, the drama and defining chapters in the history of the royal family. This week, we rewind to December 2010 when a glittering royal evening collided with one of the most volatile protests Britain had seen in years. Charles and Camilla were travelling to the royal variety performance at the London Palladium just as thousands of demonstrators filled the streets of central London protesting rising university tuition fees. Protesters surrounded their car, kicking it, throwing paint and smashing a window in scenes that shocked the nation. Joining me to look back on that extraordinary night are royal biographer Robert Jobson and news commentator Samara Gill. Thanks, guys. Thinking about this event, it's almost forgotten. It's almost like something that has gone missing in all when we talk about the drama and the protests and the issues that happen with the royal family. But Rob, how serious was it? Because the pictures I remember, the car was almost destroyed. Charles and Camilla looked quite terrified in one picture, but they were okay at the end. But how serious was it, Rob?
Very serious. I mean, look at the picture there. I mean, look at the smashed window and the paint all over it. But what I remember, I was on the Standard at the time, and it was big front page the next day. But the reality is that I remember speaking to some of the police about this, and my old friend Ken Wolfe said that it was a ridiculous choice that they went to this event and took the route they took, given that they knew that there were protests about, they knew that there had been warnings about, people being around.
There had been 50,000 people in the streets.
They knew that this was a problem, and this particular vehicle it's very difficult for them to manoeuvre. So there was no way they could in certain cars they can quickly spin around, and they were completely left exposed. And look at this, there was that, you actually, when the pictures later, you'll see the Prince of Wales as he was there looking horrified, but actually Camilla was, she was shocked. I mean, there were people literally almost getting in the car. It was a terrible moment.
You say about almost getting in the car.
There she is there, that picture.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite a picture. I mean, because what was happening there was literally a baying mob outside. They were shouting, "Off with their heads." And what happened to Camilla there was that the window was open, Rob.
It was,
and then
there was
stick.
That's right, and that was right. The stick came through, and I mean, look, I mean, this was a serious security, and there hadn't been a security incident like this, not probably since. I remember there was one with Diana way back when there was a mob that thought they were in the Jaguar, and Ken Wolfe was in that car, and they thought it was Mrs. Thatcher, and when they saw it was Diana, they went, "Oh, it's not Maggie, it's Diana," and so they left her alone. But this was a serious issue. They knew what they were doing, and to actually damage that and to get that close, you can see that someone there in that picture there at the top whacking on the window. There was genuine concern, and it definitely shook them up.
I think it's an insight, though, into the royal family and how they kind of were almost pushed into the new century of the 2000s, because you've obviously got the university fees being hiked up 3 times, but the optics of having Camilla in her fabulous diamond and emerald necklace with her bejeweled earrings in her private car, I mean, you just can't think of a worse sign of almost hypocrisy. So I think it's also them totally misjudging the public mood.
Yeah, the big Rolls Royce in the middle of a riot. I mean, what a ridiculous thing to do. Knowing also it couldn't get itself out of there, and it was a big error by the security. Actually,
they could have just written "attack us" on the side of it. It was so obvious that you're driving through a riot in a Rolls Royce.
You're just sort of waiting to be attacked, aren't you? Saying, "Oh, look at us, we're affluent and you're poor."
We always talk about the royal family stoic, particularly with Queen Elizabeth II, and I think Charles is very stoic and doesn't seem to be fussed, obviously by many things. And we saw that picture of Camilla and Charles looking quite shocked as something was poked in through the window. But at the event, they did go to the event, and they saw through the engagement, the Royal Variety performance at London Palladium, and Camilla laughed off the ordeal. She said, "I'm fine, thanks. First time for everything."
Classic them, isn't it? I mean, you remember the King's near assassination attempt?
I was there.
There you go. So he just brushed it off, really, didn't he? I mean,
well, I don't know.
well, at least publicly.
In Australia, we spoke about it in
in Australia,
the past,
he seemed. But I think media-wise, the media always, with cars and the royal family, I mean, this was after, obviously, what happened with Diana so tragically. And then you've had almost, aside from that, Meghan's New York car chase. I think people...
Which didn't really happen.
Which didn't really happen, I agree, which was a bit of a farce. But I think media-wise, when you see royal families in car, your ears immediately prick up and you go, OK, what's going on here?
There was another major one with Diana when she went up to the nuclear, where the nuclear submarines were. And that was another one where they had an attack on the car. And the bodyguard came off, got out, and actually they dealt with the attacker. Here, I think it was quite interesting because I think Camilla was more shocked than she was letting on. Charles, I think, looked relatively, calm, and he was calm in that incident in Tumblr Park because his attitude was always, and he said it out loud actually, one of these media receptions. He said, "Well, if your name's on the bullet, it's on the bullet," and that was one of those off-the-record briefings. But he was I think he's fairly relaxed in situations and relies upon his protection team to do what they've got to do.
How exposed are the royals, do you think, Rob, to this kind of action? Because this was, it wasn't a protest against the royals, it was a protest about something else, and then, Charles and Camilla happened to be there.
They're not exposed like John Lennon was exposed. They've got armed bodyguards with them wherever they go. And so, I'm amazed, actually, that the bodyguards didn't do their due diligence and didn't actually work this out, that this was going to be an absolute disaster before they went. They're supposed to recce every event, but clearly the recce went on when there wasn't 50,000 marauding students and anarchists or whatever ready to attack. So it was a poor mistake. It was a bad night for security. They would have had to go over it time and time again afterwards. Yeah.
Well, you pointed out it was a bad choice of car, the Rolls Royce, bad choice of direction.
It has no turning circles, so they couldn't have, in situations like here, I mean, and they have to be able to get over sometimes. If you want to get away from a hostile situation, you might have to cross over a barrier, the barrier in the road or whatever. Well, this is never going to do it, this car. It's too cumbersome.
But it could have got worse. Sorry, Samara, you were going to say something?
No, I just think they're obviously better at predicting these things because the intelligence services can see what's going on social media. They can analyse, different elements of protests, etc. But I do think that there might be more of this in the future because there's such a synergy between great austerity in Britain and the public rising up against the royal family because they are such a symbol of wealth and privilege. And I think that we're going to see probably more tensions arise because Britain's going into Britain's going into a very difficult period now. Not to get too geopolitical about everything, but there is a cost of living crisis. There's rising costs in general, and people look to the royal family to blame their issues on. You can have opinions on that on either side.
And there's been more protests, engagements, and we've just seen what's happened in we used to call it steaming when young kids are running around looting. But at the moment, it hasn't really they haven't been allowed, protests haven't really got that close.
No.
But I hear what you say. I mean, we are in a difficult situation. But this particular incident was really shocking. It was front page news all over. And the media, the press office tried to spin it, the royals, they were fine, they battered themselves off and they just went off and did their job. There was a lot of fallout about this. Charles was furious. There was a big inquiry into the lack of security and what went on. And Camilla was horrified that they could get so close.
Well, it could have got worse because the protection officers that were them, they were armed and they were seconds away. We're told at the time, seconds away from acting on this. Is this the kind of incident that Prince Harry is referring to when he wants the same kind of protection with armed guards following around Met Police 24 hours, armed cops whenever he's in the UK?
He made his choice. Harry made his choice, OK? He decided he didn't want to be a full-time member of the royal family. We don't give full-time protection to part-time royals. now. So why should he get it?
And just on specifically, this incident, where does it stand for, or maybe rank, or in the list of incidents that have happened? Because we have had eggs thrown at the king in the last couple of years.
The Queen late Queen had eggs thrown at her in Dresden. One nearly hit Prince Philip. The biggest incident, I think, in recent times, of course, was Charles in Tumbleham Park in Australia. I was there for that, and the kidnap attempt on Princess Anne. They're the two standout, really serious incidents. And frankly, if that had been a real gun in Australia, he'd be dead, because the police protection were just, behind the scenes. I mean, if it hadn't been for the Australian of the Year, this big rugby football player, he bundled him out of the way. Yes. Then it would have been a far more difficult situation. And
I remember an incident, it was in Latvia, where a protester was arrested for hitting Charles or whacking Charles in the face with a flower.
Well, we were in the press. I was actually there was one other journalist there, actually, and two photographers, and we were in the press pen, and this person came in the press pen. I think I'd even said to one of the coppers that, who's this person? Next thing you know, she smashed him around the face with I think it was a
red carnation.
And then it was a big incident. I think she went to prison as well. There was quite a bit. It was in Riga. And it was a big incident. But, if she'd had a knife or acid, could have thrown it in his face. It was a clear breakdown of security, yeah.
And she was protesting, I think, the bombing of Afghanistan or something.
She was actually she was a Russian supporting, she was, very anti-UN, and this was a big... Anyway, she went to prison. Charles tried hard for her not to go to prison and said for leniency, but she didn't. She was banged up.
Finally, Samara, are our royal families safe?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I think they are safe, but I also think, this is Great Britain, and if you cross the public, then you do start to get the public not on your side. And I think it's actually a good thing that the public does have that power over the royal family. Of course, I don't advocate for violence, but I also think that they need to be playing their cards right, and they can't be walking around like Marie Antoinette, who had a very unfortunate ending. And I don't wish that upon anyone in the royal family, but yeah, they're safe because they've got some of the best security in the world, but also it sits on their popularity.
Yeah, I think they are safe, but the reality is we are in a changing, volatile world, and luckily we've got Scotland Yard, who I think do an excellent job.
Yeah, and I always come back to the Harry thing. If we talk about that, I always think whenever I speak to sources like yourself that the police will, they will always protect members of the royal family, and it's insulting to suggest that they would somehow turn a blind eye, particularly in that.
The reality is, it's what he wants is different to what. If he gives notice that he's arriving at a certain time, well in advance, they will then look at the situation, assess it, and do their best to protect him. Yeah. But he wants it he wants his cake and eat it, as always with Harry.
And the police have a very difficult job. I mean, even in that incident, I'm sure there were errors, but we've got to understand that the cops are pretty good in this country, but they have a very difficult job. And protecting the royals is a tough gig. They've got to be on call all the time.
It's also, Matt, and this is very significant to taxpayers, it's also very expensive, and their priorities are not just about protecting the royal family and former government ministers. They're about protecting the citizens of this country.
All right, good debate, guys. Appreciate that. Thank you. Right, that's all we have time for on this week's Royal Exclusive Rewind. Thanks to my guests, and thanks to you for joining us. I hope you'll tune in next time for more royal nostalgia as we delve back into history to uncover another iconic moment.